My name is Daniel Crane. I'm 39 years old. I've spent most of my adult life working abroad, building up a decent life as a logistics manager in Singapore. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well and helped me provide for my aging parents back in the States. I sent money every month, never missing a single wire. My mother and younger siblings handled everything at home, at least that's what I believed. I thought we were a unit. I thought family meant something. But one flight home shattered everything I trusted. I hadn't planned the visit. Something in me, call it intuition, told me to come home. I booked a flight without telling anyone, landed in LA early that morning, and took a cab straight to our house. The driveway was empty, the lights were off, and the lockbox wasn't where it usually was. Confused, I called my mother's phone. No answer. Called my brother, my sister. Nothing. I didn't panic. Not yet. I assumed they were out shopping or maybe visiting someone. But then I checked my father's location through the old hospital app he used for checkups. The address wasn't familiar. It was the name of a private medical facility 2 towns over. By the time I got there, my gut was in knots. The nurse looked surprised when I gave my dad's name, like she'd just seen a ghost. She led me through a quiet hallway, and there he was, my father, hooked up to tubes, pale, unmoving. He was on life support, alone. No visitors logged in for 3 days, no cards, no calls, just a frail man fading in silence. I stood at his bedside, unable to speak. It felt like a betrayal so deep, it robbed me of language. I asked the nurse when he was admitted. She told me it had been nearly a week. The words barely registered. 1 week. My mother hadn't said a word, neither had my siblings. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through social media, and there it was, a flood of glossy photos. My mother, my brother, my sister, all in Bali. Lush beaches, spa selfies, poolside champagne. The captions felt like a slap across the face. Family time is everything. Resetting in paradise. And meanwhile, the man who raised us was drowning in machines. I didn't scream. I didn't break down. I just sat there next to him, holding his hand, while a cold clarity washed over me. Something inside me, something deep and quiet, clicked into place. It wasn't rage. It was realization. They hadn't just neglected him, they had erased him, and I was done playing the role of the invisible son, who wired money and stayed silent. That moment in the hospital, I knew something was about to shift, not for me but for them. Before leaving that room, I made one call. Just one. To the bank. I had full authority over the main family account, the one my salary had built over 10 years. I gave the instruction in one calm sentence: freeze every single transaction, effective immediately. What happened next unfolded fast, and exactly as I knew it would. I walked out of that hospital without looking back. Not because I didn't care, but because I had already decided my father would not be left alone again. I'd be back, but first, I needed space to think. I sat in a quiet diner down the street, ordered a black coffee I didn't even touch, and just stared through the window while notifications began lighting up my phone like firecrackers. The freeze had hit, and the first one to feel it was my mother. Her message came in first. "Dan, what's going on? The card isn't working. We're at the resort, and we can't pay for anything." Then my sister, "Bro, did you do something with the account? We're stranded here." And finally, my brother, always the prideful one, texted me like nothing had happened. "Yo, we're having some issues with the bank. Can you check it?" Not one of them asked about Dad. Not one. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. They knew what they had done. They just hadn't expected consequences. For years, I had been the quiet contributor, the one who made things work from a distance, who filled in the gaps with money and trust, and they mistook my silence for ignorance. What they didn't know was that I had every transaction logged, every medical bill unpaid, every luxury purchase from the shared account noted in a spreadsheet I kept. I had never questioned it until now. As I stared at those ballet photos again, it all came into focus. My siblings had always been a bit careless, but I chalked it up to youth. My mother, she used to be the heart of the family, or so I thought, but she had grown addicted to the appearance of wealth, of influence. My father had been sick for a while, and yet they treated his decline like an inconvenience. They stopped accompanying him to checkups. They started planning more trips. When I'd ask about him on the phone, they'd brush it off. He's resting, or he's fine. I believed them. That's what hurts the most. There were warning signs. Sure, small things. My sister once mentioned she didn't have the time to drive Dad to a clinic. My mother casually joked that old men cling to life like broken clocks. I laughed then. I thought she was just tired. But now I see what it was. They had moved on from him. He had become a burden, not a father, and that realization burned through me like acid. Not in anger, but in deep, focused resolve. That night, I checked him into a new private hospital. My name on every document, my personal funds paying for a full-time nurse. I didn't mention it to anyone. I didn't gloat. I just quietly took the role they abandoned. The next morning, I left a voicemail for each of them. Dad is stable. He's under my care now. You may continue your vacation. No emotion, no explanations, just fact. And then I went to the bank again. This time I started separating every joint asset linked to me, and I did it calmly, legally, and with precision. I wasn't going to yell. I was going to erase them from every account they thought they had power over. I spent the next 2 days in my old room, quiet, methodical, and unraidable. While they were sipping cocktails on the other side of the world, I was setting up a fortress. I brought in my lawyer, a quiet, sharp man who had helped me with overseas property before. I gave him full access to every shared asset, every account, every property deed that had my name tied to it. We created a paper trail so clean, so ironclad, that by the time they landed back in the country, they wouldn't even know how much had slipped from their grasp. I didn't act out of vengeance. I acted out of grief, strategic grief. The kind that's sharp enough to cut through legal loopholes and bloodline excuses. I had funded nearly 60% of our family's holdings. My father had made me a joint owner of 2 properties without telling the others years ago, trusting I'd be the one to hold things together if anything went wrong. That trust became the very key that would unravel their illusion of control. I revisited those properties, our childhood home and a small rental in Palm Springs. Both were under-maintained. My brother had promised to handle them while I was overseas. The grass was dead, the gutters caved in, and the Palm Springs unit had a broken lock and unpaid taxes piling up. I took pictures of everything. I documented every failure, every neglectful decision, not because I needed it, but because I wanted proof that silence had been a pattern in this family for far too long. My lawyer and I drafted 2 sets of papers, one removing every family member from access to the shared trust I created for Dad's care, and another rerouting the remaining investments under a new fund in his name. I wasn't just freezing the flow of money, I was redirecting it, rebuilding it with accountability. This wasn't about punishment, this was about clarity. I needed to see who they were without the cushion I provided. At night, I'd sit beside my father's bed. His eyes fluttered sometimes, like he was trying to wake up. The doctors weren't sure how long he'd been slipping into that state, but I talked to him anyway. I told him what I was doing. I told him I saw everything now, and I promised him, out loud, that no one would ever erase him again. That he would never be a forgotten man in a hospital hallway while his wife and children posed on a beach. The phone calls came in waves, First angry, then pleading, then manipulative. My sister cried into a voicemail saying I was tearing the family apart. My brother ranted that I was acting like a dictator. My mother left a message I didn't even finish. Her tone was cold, offended, like I was the one betraying them. But I didn't answer, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing. By the time they landed back in California, the air around them had already shifted. The house was locked, the utilities re-rated, every shared line of credit cancelled. The trust accounts, the real estate income, the retirement savings, they found themselves shut out of it all. I hadn't touched what wasn't mine, but I reclaimed every dollar that bore my name. I didn't leave them in ruins, I left them in truth. And truth for people like them is the most terrifying currency of all. They came to the hospital finally. My sister arrived first. Fake tears already loaded behind designer sunglasses. She walked in like a stranger trying to act like a daughter. My father was still unconscious, but she spoke to him like she'd been by his side the whole time. I watched her from the hallway. She didn't know I was there. Then my brother showed up, his anger barely contained, his words sharp as glass when he saw me. "You're out of line, Dan. This isn't your call." I just stared at him, calm, unreadable, letting his own reflection do the work. My mother didn't come until the next day. She walked in without shame, wearing a white linen dress that reeked of wealth and detachment. She didn't greet me, she went straight to my father's bedside and whispered something in his ear. I stood quietly by the window, and then she turned to me with a smile. "I'll never forget." "So dramatic, Daniel," she said. "Is this really necessary?" I didn't respond. I just handed her a sealed envelope with the legal revisions. "You're no longer a trustee," I told her. "Dad's care is no longer your burden." She read the papers slowly, her smile fading with every paragraph. Her hand shook, just a little. "You think this makes you better than us?" she asked. I didn't reply, because it wasn't about being better. It was about being done, about ending a cycle of neglect, wrapped in tradition. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to fight. I had already won the moment I chose peace over participation. They left the hospital soon after, whispering among themselves, no longer confident, no longer in control. I didn't escort them out. I didn't watch them go. I returned to my father's room, adjusted his blanket, and sat beside him again. The nurse told me his vitals were steady, his chances uncertain. But I knew one thing for sure. He could feel the difference. The silence was no longer abandonment. It was protection. A few days later, the hospital staff informed me someone had tried to access Dad's file without authorization. I already knew who it was. I didn't report it, I simply strengthened the firewall. I made it clear through action. This man was no longer theirs to manage. His legacy, his care, his dignity were now in the hands of the son who never needed recognition to do what was right. The tide had turned, and I had done it without shouting, without warning. In the weeks that followed, the distance between us became something real, something permanent. My mother, once the puppet master behind our family's image, began to lose her grip on everything she had quietly controlled. The credit card companies started calling her directly. The property taxes she never paid became her burden now. Her tone shifted from pride to panic in every voicemail she left, but I never returned a single call. I had said all I needed to say by saying nothing at all. My brother tried to play the martyr. He posted cryptic messages on social media about family betrayal and people who forget where they came from. His friends commented with sympathy, not realizing he was the architect of his own downfall. I never corrected him. I let the silence hang around him like smoke. And slowly people stopped responding to his self-made narrative. The truth always finds its way through the cracks. It doesn't need to shout, it just waits. My sister tried to repair things through charm. She offered to help out with Dad's care, even suggested a family dinner to talk it all out. But when I asked her one simple question, "Where were you when he stopped breathing?" she had no answer. Her eyes welled up, but I wasn't moved. I didn't need her tears. I needed her absence to mean something. So I declined the invitation, kindly, firmly, and I let the weight of her own choices settle in. The house, the one they all once walked through like royalty, was sold quietly through a private buyer. I took nothing from it, but one framed photo of my father fishing on a quiet lake. I left everything else behind. I wanted no trophies, no souvenirs of a place where love had been replaced by performance. I moved Dad into a hospice retreat by the water. He began to open his eyes more often. Sometimes I'd catch him smiling at nothing. Sometimes he'd squeeze my hand, and that was more valuable than anything they'd ever tried to inherit. My lawyer kept me updated. There were attempts to contest the financial changes, letters from their attorneys, empty threats. But the documents were airtight. The proof of neglect was thorough. And the truth was heavy. No amount of shouting could lift it off them. They weren't being punished. They were simply being revealed. And I didn't have to lift a single finger to make it happen. I had simply stopped protecting them from the truth. One morning, the hospital called me in. My father had spoken. Just one word. "Son." That was all I needed. That single breath undid every falsehood they'd built around him. He knew who stayed. He knew who didn't. And in that small whispered moment, I realized something. I hadn't just saved him, I had saved myself. The morning my father passed, the sky outside the window was silver, soft, quiet, without drama. I sat beside him holding his hand, not because I was obligated, but because I had chosen to be there. He didn't suffer, he simply let go. The machines didn't scream. The world didn't shift. It was a gentle exit, the kind a man deserves when he's given his whole life to others. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there with him, memorizing the stillness, the dignity. That moment was ours alone. I handled the arrangements myself. No family group chats, no shared decisions, just a simple private ceremony near the water he loved. A few old friends showed up, real ones, men who had fished with him. A nurse who said he reminded her of her grandfather. I spoke briefly, not to impress, but to honor. I said he was a man who showed up quietly and left the same way. And in the end, that was enough. No fireworks, no false mourning, just truth, standing still in the wind. My mother and siblings weren't there. They sent flowers, a card. I never responded. Because closure isn't about confrontation, it's about clarity, and I had found mine. I never told them where he was buried. I never opened the door they left wide open behind them. Some things, once broken, don't need mending, they need to be left behind. And so I left them in the chapter they chose, while I began a new one, clean, unburdened, and whole. The accounts stayed closed, the properties sold, the silence between us grew roots. They tried a few more times to reach out, empty invitations to start fresh. I didn't hate them, I just saw them clearly now. And with clarity comes peace. I wasn't interested in rebuilding what they destroyed. I had already built something better, a life anchored in truth, not illusion. And that life no longer needed their approval, their presence, or their version of love. I moved up north, to a quiet town by the coast. I bought a small house with wide windows and no memories. I planted a tree in the yard in my father's name. Some mornings I sit on the porch with coffee, and I imagine what he'd say about the waves. I don't feel guilt. I don't feel rage. I feel done, and there is freedom in being done. Not because I won, but because I didn't become like them. I held the line. I stayed true. After the dust truly settled, I found myself in possession of something far more valuable than the money they used to chase. Control over my own narrative. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to life, I was writing it. The legal mess faded, the calls finally stopped, and the silence that remained wasn't cold, it was clean. People think revenge is about taking something away, but real revenge is refusing to be bound by the roles others wrote for you, and I had walked off their stage entirely. I kept working remotely, consulting for international firms that appreciated precision and quiet leadership. But I shifted my focus. I started investing in smaller, local ventures, real businesses run by decent people, a struggling bookstore, a mechanic shop, a farm. I gave them structure, tools, strategy, but stayed invisible. I wanted to use what I'd learned to build, not control. There's a kind of satisfaction in lifting others up without needing to be thanked. My wealth grew, but so did my peace. I also began journaling, something my father used to do in fragments. In those pages, I wrote everything I never said aloud, not for revenge, not for memory, but for reflection. I wanted to understand how a family could fracture so easily when no one held anyone accountable, and how, sometimes the one who returns home, not to forgive, but to witness, becomes the only one strong enough to change the story, not for the others, but for himself. People in town didn't ask many questions. They liked that I didn't talk much, and I liked that they didn't care about my past. I wasn't Daniel the provider, Daniel the forgotten son. I was just the man who drank his coffee black, tipped generously, and read in the park. There's a kind of quiet anonymity that becomes sacred after years of being used for what you can provide. I didn't need applause. I needed unnoticed peace. And I found it. Every once in a while, I'd get a letter forwarded from my old address, mostly junk. But one day, I opened one from my sister. It wasn't dramatic, just a short note that said, "I see now, I'm sorry." I folded it once, placed it in a drawer, and never replied. Forgiveness doesn't always need words. Sometimes it's the boundary you choose to maintain, even when the door cracks open. And so, I built a life that didn't require healing from constant wounds, a life where I chose who to love, not who to tolerate. And with each day that passed, I realized something profound. I didn't need a family that abandoned their own. I needed to become the kind of man my father always hoped I would be. Not loud, not bitter, just unwavering, just whole. The legacy my family thought they were entitled to, houses, investments, status, was never theirs. They believed legacy was something passed down through signatures and wills. But what my father left me wasn't written in ink. It was built in silence, in the way he looked after people, never expecting anything in return. His legacy lived in every patient nod, every early morning drive to work, every quiet sacrifice he made without complaint. That's what I inherited, and that's what they never understood. I set up a scholarship fund in his name, the Harold Crane Honor Grant. It was small at first, just enough to help working-class students who wanted to care for others, nursing, social work, counseling, fields my father respected deeply. Each applicant had to write about someone they once felt invisible next to, and how they chose to see them anyway. That was the theme, seeing the unseen. It became a quiet force of good, and it was mine to give, not theirs to claim. I remember the day I visited his grave after the first round of grants had been awarded. The tree I planted near the stone had already grown to shoulder height. I stood there, letting the wind move through me like an answer to a question I no longer needed to ask. I told him everything about the students, about the bookstore, about how I didn't just survive. I built something sacred from what they abandoned. And I swear, for a moment the branches leaned just slightly toward me, as if he knew. Meanwhile, my siblings kept living in the noise. I heard through someone that my brother declared bankruptcy after a failed crypto venture. My sister moved 3 times in 2 years, chasing the next big job that never lasted. My mother, she moved to Florida, according to a letter from a lawyer, trying to reopen the inheritance claim. But they were ghosts now. I didn't hate them. I just didn't feed the memory of them anymore. You don't heal by keeping the infection alive. There's something deeply powerful in refusing to chase justice because you became it. I never made a spectacle. I never raised my voice. But I rewrote everything they thought they controlled, and I did it not to humiliate them, but to prove to myself that quiet, sustained strength can move mountains they never even saw coming. I didn't need revenge. I needed restoration. And now, every sunrise feels earned. Every moment of peace feels like a reward I paid for in patience and pain. I sleep well. I trust slowly. I love intentionally, and I know who I am. Not because of what they did to me, but because of what I chose not to become. There's a point where the past stops chasing you, not because it gave up, but because you simply walked too far ahead to hear its footsteps anymore. That's where I live now. Not in denial, not in bitterness, but in distance. A chosen distance, protected by silence and rebuilt on my own terms. I no longer wait for apologies. I no longer expect understanding. I live in a house built with intention, not inheritance. And everything within it is a reflection of the man I chose to become, not the boy they tried to shape. I still visit the hospital from time to time, not for grief, but for gratitude. I volunteer on weekends, helping families navigate the quiet confusion that comes when a loved one is between here and gone. I sit with sons who don't know what to say. I speak when needed, and stay quiet when that's kinder. Sometimes they ask me how I know what they're feeling. And I just smile, because pain gives you empathy when you let it make you better, not bitter. One afternoon, while walking past the very hallway where I first saw my father on life support, I paused. Not because it haunted me, but because I realized it no longer did. That hallway used to feel like a wound. Now it feels like a beginning. That was the moment I understood that love, real love, shows up, even when it's inconvenient, even when no one else does. That's what my father gave me. That's what I've been living out ever since. The people who once called me selfish, dramatic, cold, they don't call me at all anymore, and I'm fine with that. Because I know what they'll never say, that deep down they respect what I did, maybe even envy it. The clarity, the boundaries, the peace. I didn't destroy them. I just stopped holding up the part of the house they kept pretending was still theirs. And when the floor caved in, they called it betrayal, but all I did was step away. Sometimes peace is not the absence of noise, but the absence of performance. I no longer perform for family, for appearances, for roles I never auditioned for. I no longer confuse proximity with loyalty, blood with character. I know now that love without responsibility is just decoration, and I've had enough of decoration. I want substance, quiet, solid, uncompromising substance. And so I live my days with fewer people, but deeper roots. I give without being seen. I rest without guilt. And when I look in the mirror, I see a man who didn't win by overpowering but by outlasting. The storm passed. The debris settled. And I am still here, whole, wise, and free. Peace doesn't always arrive like a sunrise. Sometimes it comes like the quiet closing of a door, soft, deliberate, permanent. That door for me came in the form of one final letter, handwritten, from my mother, not forwarded by a lawyer this time, but sent directly. The envelope was plain, the handwriting a little shaky. Inside were 6 pages, each one laced with attempts at reflection, scattered apologies, and still hints of control. She wrote of missing the way we used to be, of hoping one day I would understand that she did what she thought was best. But the truth is, if you have to explain neglect, it was never love to begin with. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. There's a strange strength in choosing not to open old wounds. You don't heal by poring over them. You heal by not letting them define the next chapter. I placed the letter in a drawer, with the rest of the unresolved, not as a keepsake, but as a reminder. I am not who they hoped I'd become. I'm not a replica of their patterns. I am the one who stopped the inheritance of pain. In the evenings, I sometimes walk by the shoreline alone. No music, no phone, just the sound of waves pulling away from sand, like life, always returning what's meant to be kept and washing away what never truly belonged. That's how I see my story now. Not a tale of revenge, but of retrieval. I didn't destroy my family. I retrieved myself from the ashes of their neglect. And in that quiet retrieval, I became a man they'll never fully understand. Every room in my home is filled with intention. No clutter, no chaos, just books, warm light and silence that feels like safety. I've learned that peace isn't about escaping noise. It's about building a life where noise doesn't follow you. I don't need loud victories or public praise. My win was waking up one day and realizing I hadn't thought about them in weeks, and when I did, it didn't hurt. If you had told the younger version of me, the one wiring money overseas, praying he was doing enough, that this is where it would all lead, I'm not sure he'd believe it, but I would tell him, it's coming. The storm will break. You'll learn that betrayal is loud at first, and then it echoes into silence. But your silence, that becomes your power. My name is Daniel Crane. I came home to loss and found clarity. I buried my father with love. I buried the rest with truth. And now, I live not in reaction, but in command. I didn't just survive what they did. I outgrew it, quietly, completely, and I never went back. Not even once, because some stories aren't meant to be rewritten. They're meant to end, and mine, it ends here, with peace, with power, and with no one else holding the pen but me. 6 months later, there was a family gathering, a cousin's wedding. Everyone would be there. The kind of event where people pretend nothing happened, where small talk replaces apologies and silence is served beside the champagne. I received the invitation in the mail, cream-colored envelope, gold cursive. My name printed like I still belonged. I looked at it for a long moment before placing it in the bin. I didn't even open it, because healing isn't proven by showing up. Sometimes it's sealed by choosing not to. That evening, while they posed for photos under twinkling lights, I sat on my porch with a worn book in one hand and a cup of tea in the other. The air was cool, steady. I didn't check social media. I didn't wonder what I missed. Because I hadn't missed anything. I had traded chaos for clarity, performance for presence, and presence doesn't need a crowd to be meaningful. It needs only truth and the courage to stay in it. I've learned that walking away doesn't mean you're weak. It means you've finally understood your value. I was no longer the invisible one who held things together from behind the curtain. I was the architect of my own peace. I didn't burn bridges. I simply walked so far across them, they vanished in the distance. And the moment you stop looking back is the moment your future begins to unfold without apology. A neighbor passed by that night, waved and asked if I was going to the big family thing. I just smiled and said, "Not this time." He nodded like he understood more than he let on. Sometimes strangers see you clearer than your blood ever did, and that's the gift pain gives you: vision. The ability to see what was real, what was fake, and what no longer deserves a seat at your table. That same night, I found one of my dad's old notebooks. Tucked inside the back was a single line, written in his sharp, slanted script. "When you stop being needed, you'll find who truly loves you." It hit me like a wind I didn't know I was bracing against. He knew, long before I did. He saw what I tried not to see. And he left me that final thread of understanding, not as warning, but as blessing. So I stayed home that night, unseen, unbothered, and absolutely, undeniably free. Because the greatest revenge is not proving them wrong. It's becoming so right within yourself that they no longer matter at all.